It's a randomized dietary trial. It happened to be an identical twins, which was very unusual. I've never done it before. Identical twins are absolutely hilarious, but the two diet choices that they had to be willing to be part of, either way, whichever way the coin was flipped, was a vegan or an omnivorous diet. And I want to clarify just for kicks here, a healthy vegan and a healthy omnivorous diet. There's a lot of bad ways to do any diet and good ways, or better or worse, for any diet that you want to be on. And so when we looked at the metabolic risk factors, we had signed up on clinicaltrials.gov stating that LDL cholesterol was our primary outcome, and that dropped by about.
In a world full of advertisements peddling the latest health crazes, distinguishing between marketing ploys and scientific facts can feel like navigating a maze of misinformation. Well, our guest today busts those myths and provides clarity on what food choices are truly going to help you. Dr. Christopher Gardner is a professor of medicine at Stanford University and a nutrition researcher. He's overseen many studies, including those comparing various popular diets, such as keto versus Mediterranean diets or vegan versus omnivore. He's researched how just swapping out a small amount of animal meat with plant-based meat can have positive effects, and how we react to nutrients like soy, garlic, and various supplements. And that's just a few of his studies. Dr. Gardner is also working to get healthier, more sustainable food into the food service industry. His research has been published in top-tier scientific journals and featured all over the media. In 2023, he released a groundbreaking exploration of the cardiometabolic effects in identical twins eating either vegan or omnivorous diets. This research serves as the centerpiece of the 2024 Netflix documentary, You Are What You Eat, a Twin Experiment. So in today's episode, we will delve into Dr. Gardner's food studies and learn science-based nutrition advice so we can all achieve our health goals. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gardner.
Well, I don't know. There's some high expectations. I'm ready to hear what we're going to talk about. This sounds fun.
That's right. Well, the first bit you probably aren't going to think that we were going to ask, but when we did our research and we looked in and we read about you, learned that you've been eating plant-based since 83. Is that correct? 1983. Yeah.
Yes.
But especially interested in the fact that you became plant-based. Someone you were dating was eating plant-based. But I thought it was really interesting that you found that you liked eating that way. Said no man ever that we've ever talked to. And there was no Beyond Burger in 83. So I'm really curious about what the food was that hooked you and what were the flavors that you loved and why'd you fall in love with it?
Well, so first of all, let's be clear. So in 83, Tiffany dumped me. So it was all for love. And she didn't take me back. She was a vegetarian and I wasn't. It totally didn't work. But I was a philosophy major in college. So a lot of this is not just taste, but personal values. So it really started with alignment with personal values for me, philosophically. And then I was going to, what do you do with a philosophy major? I was a barista and a waiter, and I worked in a lot of restaurants for a long time. I was going to have a vegetarian restaurant and it would be vegetarian because that's what I had been for years. And I was pretty sure people were going to make fun of my amino acids. And so I said, I'm really tired of this. Where do you get your protein thing? So I'm going to get a graduate degree. But I mean, given all my restaurant experience, I actually like to cook, and I have pretty decent knife skills. And I mean, I cook Indian and Mediterranean and Asian and Latin American. God, there's so many fabulously delicious things to eat. Yeah, it wasn't a problem for me. It was a great transition.
It's the plants that flavor everything.
Spices.
Yeah.
There's herbs out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What's your very favorite food in the whole wide world?
Raspberries.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Mine are blackberries, so that's a close.
So I mentioned the twins study, which is one of your most recent research projects. And can you share with us, a lot of people who are listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube have watched the documentary. But for those folks who haven't, can you share with us the design of the study and the results of the twin study that was covered, because there's been some controversy around it.
Yeah. I'd be happy to discuss the design and a couple of criticisms that could be easily addressed. So the basic design is it's a randomized dietary trial. It happened to be an identical twins, which was very unusual. I've never done it before. Identical twins are absolutely hilarious, but the two diet choices that they had to be willing to be part of, either way, whichever way the coin was flipped, was a vegan or an omnivorous diet. And I want to clarify just for kicks here, a healthy vegan and a healthy omnivorous diet. There's a lot of bad ways to do any diet and good ways, or better or worse, for any diet that you want to be on. And we're actually coming up with a side paper to address some comments we've had. So healthy eating index is a common metric in research that's been around for decades. And so we measured a healthy eating index score before they joined the study and when they were on the study. And so not only did the healthy vegans do well and better than they were eating before, but even the twins that got randomly assigned to the omnivorous diet, they were eating better than before the study, according to this healthy eating index score. An important part of the design was asking them to accept delivered food for 4 weeks. So that kind of makes them instantaneously adherent, especially because for those being randomized to vegan, I think a lot of them thought, so what is this? This is beans and rice and rabbit food and lettuce, right? That's all I'm eating for 4 weeks. And then, no, we delivered about 50 different entrees to them so they could see the range of what was possible on a vegan diet. And after 4 weeks, they had to cook on their own for another 4 weeks. And at the beginning, in the middle, and the end, they had to give us blood and poop and fill out lots of questionnaires. Super proud about the conduct of this study. So we had 22 pairs going in. Only one person dropped out of the study in the 8 weeks. They were matched to the twins. So we actually couldn't use their twins' data, which was kind of sad because their twin finished everything. But 21 out of 22 is fabulous in terms of retention in my world. And so when we looked at the metabolic risk factors, we had signed up on clinicaltrials.gov stating that LDL cholesterol was our primary outcome. And that dropped by about 15 milligrams per deciliter, more so in the vegans than the omnivores. We also saw a drop in insulin. We saw a drop in weight, a decrease in trimethylamine oxide. Their biological clocks got a little bit younger. Their telomeres stayed a little bit longer if they were vegans. And that's probably a quick summary of all the things that went well. I did have a couple comments on diet. B12 was down in the vegans. So we don't have any clinical outcomes from B12. That would take too long to wait for. But yes, when they were vegan, their B12 was down.
Well, we know that would happen, right? So you didn't really need to, and you didn't supplement. You chose not to supplement with them?
Yeah. So I actually find there's enough foods that are fortified with B12 that you're probably okay. And that there was even if they got no extra B12 for 8 weeks, there would have been no clinical harm at all to that. But that was like the only adverse thing that I can think of would be the B12.
I was really fascinated by the telomeres part because I know from Dr. Dean Ornish's work and has been on the podcast, and we went into a deep conversation on telomeres, that was a relatively short period of time for telomeres to stay the same or lengthen. And at the beginning, Louis Facilios, who directed it, was saying, we didn't think the telomeres would change at all. Like it was almost kind of this like, well, we're going to put them in there, but that's not probably going to, change is probably not going to happen. Tell me about it. Were you surprised? And what did you find out? I know they lengthened some, but which twins and was it a lot? And we didn't really get any specifics from Louis on the, besides the fact that it was surprising that they lengthened.
So I was surprised also, and with these biological clocks that take advantage of epigenetic markers. There's a group called True Diagnostics that offered to do the biological clock. The telomeres were done at UCSF, and totally surprised. I said, Louis, this is just a waste of money. It's not enough time to do this. I've looked at the literature. It takes longer than that. That particular paper is separate because there's so much detail in that. The one that we've published so far is all on cardiometabolic. There's actually 2 papers coming out. One will be very specific to the microbiome, and that won't be for another few months, but we've actually sent out the paper for the biological clocks and the telomeres. It's actually been pre-printed, and so people saw it already. And we just got comments from reviewers back today, and we're working on it. So I can't actually specifically tell you which twins and how much, because we have to get into those details. But it was statistically significant, which was really surprising. Yes, I was surprised.
And so our audience knows is that the longer your telomeres, the longer your life, essentially. So preserving those telomeres can lengthen your life.
And the biological clocks, I mean, the same thing is like you have a chronological age and you have a metabolic age, and the metabolic age is more important. How are you doing metabolically? What if you're old and active and fit and vibrant? Then old isn't as important as vibrant.
And could you also break down the cholesterol? You said the blood serum cholesterol, and did I hear you right? It was about 15 points different.
Yeah, and there's actually a really subtle thing that didn't come up. So I hope you and your readers can imagine that when you randomly assign people, one of the expectations is the 2 groups are equal at baseline because you randomly assigned them. But unless there's hundreds or thousands of people, it doesn't always work out. It turned out at baseline, the vegan group was at about 100 milligrams per deciliter, and the omnivore group was about 115. So the vegans had less room for improvement, and yet they still went down about 15 milligrams per deciliter to 85. And the omnivores barely budged. So the difference, so the most sophisticated statistical way to do this is change versus change. Change of the omnivores versus change of the vegans. Part of what got lost in translation there was the vegans kind of had their work cut out for them because they were lower to begin with. So again, I was sort of doubly impressed with that change.
And what about the microbiome? Because I don't think that was addressed at all in the documentary. And as Dotsie and I know from the doctors we've spoken with on this show, is the microbiome can change very rapidly if you change your diet.
Yeah. And again, so we don't have final results on this. We had some interesting changes. Let me talk a little about my colleagues, Justin and Erica Sonnenberg, who for years worked with mice. All the mouse science that they did suggested that, wow, diet is the biggest lever into the health of the microbiome. That seems simple. Why don't we just take it to humans? Why are we working with mice? You know, in a traditional basic science group, they'll do something in a mouse. They'll find out mechanistically. You can do manipulations quicker. You can study generations of mice quicker than generations of humans. And then later you translate it to humans. These guys are interested in flipping that and doing work in humans. And this is why this is going to take a little longer to come out. They've taken the human work from the twin study, and they're working with mice now to see if they can explain the mechanisms of the change that was reported in the humans. So that's going to come out in a couple of months, but they're actually backing it up, looking for a mechanistic explanation of the study's results that we got in the 21 pairs of humans.
I guess I thought that was already pretty clear with microbiome, and what you eat is that more fiber helps the microbiome diversify and get healthier. Do we really need to do that in mice?
Yeah, but which one? So the fun part is which microbes change, what is it related to? So Alexandra, the goal in the long run will be a personalized nutrition approach where we'll look at your microbiome. There's thousands of microbes, which is part of the problem. We'll see that, oh, look at that. Interesting. You're deficient in a couple of these salutogenic or healthy microbes. And the presence of a couple pathogenic ones are in there too. I think if we feed you more of this and less of that, we'll help balance that out. And the healthy ones will bloom and thrive, and they'll outcompete the pathogenic ones. And that's how we'll help your gut more. So sure, there's the simple measures these days are often simply diversity. Yes, you have a more diverse microbiome, but really the target for this in the long run is that there are pathogenic and healthy bacteria, and we want to balance that in the best way we can. And that's where it's going to take years to sort out some of those details.
And my dear Alexandra is saying, but not at the expense of mice and slavery. So we'll move on. I know where that's headed. And, she's right. Back her up. Let's learn about people from you and what you learned, because people are certainly not robots. And you said, there are a lot of areas of this study that were tough because they're just human beings and they're in their own homes, and the food is coming. So it's not an extremely controlled environment, although they have promised that they'll stay true to it. What have you learned about human beings in general from working with 22 or then 21 sets of twins as they tried to implement these very new habits for many of them?
Yeah. Well, so I worked with 2,000 people in more than 24 studies, and so they're really more similar than different. There's a lot of people willing to change, willing to experiment. I think we do a great job in the beginning of saying, look, if you're not willing to be randomized to both diets, if you're not willing to be honest with us about your diet, don't sign up. Read about it. It'll be in the papers. It'll be in a journal. But if you want to do this, be prepared that if you can't follow the instructions that we had, we actually really need to hear that so that other people will know that it was hard or too hard or it was a challenge, and here's how you overcame it. And I just have some funny anecdotes to share. I'll just wrap them all up in one. It's amazing what people will call and tell us to say, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I have to do a diet assessment today, and I have to tell you that I was at a party and somebody had this thing and I had some. How much did you have? Well, I had a cup. I said, okay, and how about the other days? No, the other days I was fine, but today I had a cup of that thing. It's like, okay, thank you for being so honest.
So none of them were supposed to drink during this whole thing? I guess.
No. So I'm picking a cup as just like if there was something they weren't supposed to drink.
Of whatever it was, okay.
Very small infractions. And their reaction of guilt to the small infractions are really endearing. They're like, oh my God, America and the world are counting on me to do this. And I screwed them over because I had that one thing that was 30 calories yesterday. And it's like, no, you're not kicked out of this study. That was part of this. But Dotsie, to get maybe more directly to your comment there, which was, I think, captured actually really well in the docuseries, was when they were getting randomized and they had agreed to be on either one. Some of them clearly had a preference. If you'll remember, at one point, and I say this in all my studies, I say, okay, you're about to start the study. We're about to randomize you. Think of the one you want the least and expect to get that one because your luck sucks. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, that might happen, right? And so you could see as we did this big reveal, somebody say, oh, he was right. He told me I might get the one that I didn't want. It was quite a mixed reaction. Some of them really wanted to try vegan, and somebody were really dreading the fact that they might get it. And there were a lot of comments in the docuseries of, oh my God, I've started. What have I done to myself? Some of the twins have called us back now and asked if we can help them both go vegan.
Fun.
And we've asked if they would be willing to do it socially or to do it on social media and to track. So we're sort of working on some things with some of them. Not all, but some certainly. Stanford did a little blurb on some of the twins that weren't actually featured in the docuseries. And one of those for sure changed diet, went vegan for months and kind of settled in at vegetarian and feels really great about it. So yeah, I think a lot of them made changes that are standing the test of time.
Where are the cheese bros?
They are going to work with us. That's one of the pairs that wants to both go vegan. Yeah, Michael and Charlie called us up and we actually just created something powered by plants that we have on a website. And we sort of have a 4-week starter plan for you and some videos and some encouragement and some resources. So it's pretty fun.
Very cool. You just poweredbyplants.com or where people can go check it out?
Just put it up. Yeah. So you might need to start looking at nutrition.stanford.edu. It's probably in there. That's part of our website. We'll get you the website information so you can flash it when you do this. Meg will help out.
Let's talk about some studies that you've done in the past that might be of interest to our audience. The you did the diet fits. You mentioned either healthy low fat versus healthy low carb. That's a question a lot of people have. Should I eat low carb? Should I eat low fat? What's the best way for me to lose weight? You did it with overweight and obese adults for 1 year. Explain to us what you found.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll go back to a previous study called A2Z, which was Atkins, Zone, Ornish, and a traditional health professionals approach. That's where we got all the letters. And if you arrange them right, it can be A2Z and be cute. 300 women got randomized to those diets. And there, after a year, there were just a few pounds difference between the groups on average. But what just blew me away was the range of response to people who were reading the same book. It was like a 60-pound range. Somebody lost 50 pounds, somebody gained 10, and everything in between on all 4 diets. And all kinds of people asked me for this slide that showed, like I had everybody as one bar in a graph. So all 300 women were on one graph showing a pattern for the 4 diets. It's like, oh my God, the patterns are almost identical on all 4 diets, even though they're crazy different. Ornish is crazy low fat, and Atkins is crazy low carb. So Diet Fits was in response to that.
Can I ask you something about A to Z? So this was this just looking at weight loss efficacy, or was it also health benefits too? And did you find anything since we're on that study?
Yeah. So basically, as everybody lost weight, there were lots of differences that were better. I have to go back to A to C to see if I can remember. I'm going to guess on Atkins, LDL cholesterol went up more and was worse, but on Atkins, triglycerides went down more and was better.
Because of
something
the
like
lack
that.
of
But
carbs or processed carbs.
yeah. But Diet Fits was designed to really go at that with 600 people, men and women, not just women, and very specifically to look at what we thought might explain that variability within each diet. So one of the things that we thought of was a genetic predisposition, and somebody helped us come up with a genetic marker for this, a 3-SNP multi-locus genotype pattern that might have predicted it. And I was really interested in the insulin resistance side of this. So I actually totally bought into this idea that, yes, some people are more insulin resistant than others. A typical low-fat diet is very high in carbohydrate. Wow, maybe that's challenging for someone who has more insulin resistance to be on a low-fat, high-carb diet. Maybe if we have 2 really good diets, so let's make the best low carb and the best low fat we can, healthy low carb, healthy low fat, for a year. And let's predict that we'll get what we got in A to Z. We'll get like a 60-pound range. Somebody will gain 10, somebody will lose 50. 60-pound range, which we totally got, replicated that. Probably what explains it is some kind of predisposition, a metabolic predisposition or a genetic predisposition. And the main finding of Diet Fits was, despite over 6,000 pounds of weight loss, there was no predictive factors that we found. They had the same range, wide variability in response, but the insulin resistance didn't work and the genotype didn't work. And to be honest, I was a little skeptical about the genotype. There's a bazillion different ways you could do a genotype, but insulin resistance was more cut and dry. There's a couple ways to measure it. There's different proxy measures. There's no perfect way to measure it, but we used what's called insulin 30. So 30 minutes into a glucose tolerance test where you've, on a fasting stomach, had 75 grams of straight glucose for this oral glucose tolerance test, which shoots straight into your bloodstream because there's nothing in your stomach. And you get an immediate insulin response to this. And if you're insulin resistant, your insulin goes very high. And if you're more insulin sensitive, it stays low. So it's pretty cut and dry what that one is. It didn't work at all. That did not predict who in the low carb group lost the most or the least. And I struggled with this for a long time because I was convinced this was going to work. There are other smaller, shorter trials that had shown this. This was a larger, longer trial. And what the conclusion we came to was that both diets were high quality. we asked the low carbers to eat a high quality low carb diet. And so you know, what the heck is a high quality low carb diet? Well, to me, a low quality low carb diet would be fatty meats and processed things where really the focus is just eliminating carbs, but having keto bombs or, keto brownies or things like, why not food? So low carb was that. And it was pretty funny that some of the low carbers criticized us for Diet Fits for making unfairly a healthy low fat diet. Said, why didn't you let them have white flour and soda? Those are low fat. I said, well, no, that's the problem. If low fat is sodas and white flour and lots of those types of things, that's not going to be good for your metabolism. So it was a healthy low fat and a healthy low carb. And we got good success on average across both groups, but still weren't able to predict why there was so much variability. And I've come to think it's something to do with satiety, but may not have time to get into that.
So, well, with these, how adherent were the participants? And because did you help them with this, or because adherence is also a big factor, right? When these studies are hard to measure.
Yeah. So very importantly for Diet Fits, we didn't set a percent that they had to hit or a gram amount they had to hit. I know from doing these studies that if you want to get a grant reviewer to fund this, you should give them a percent. We're going to be very scientific and we're going to hit this number of grams or this percent. If you follow a real human being from day to day, if you follow a nutrition professional day to day, they can't hit those numbers day after. It's too much counting. People, if you're going to enjoy your food, you try your best. So what we did instead was we said, okay, so there's going to be a limbo phase where you try to go as low as you can. So cut out every carb you can, cut out every gram of fat you can, just so you know you're making a huge difference in your diet. We want you to get to 20 grams of fat or 20 grams of carb in the first 8 weeks. But then we want to look you in the eye and say, are you happy? Can you do this socially? Can you find meals like this? Or is this a diet that you would go on now and go off when the study is over? Because if that's what it is, then you're not there yet. Please add a little carb or a little fat back. Are you there yet? No? Okay, please add a little more carb or a little more fat back. Now look us in the eye. Could you do this forever? Okay, if you think you could do it forever, then that's actually what America wants to know what that is. Like, what's a reasonable low carb and a reasonable low fat? And so if you look at the paper, I won't be able to come up with those numbers off the top of my head, but the low fatters couldn't really get below 25% fat, even though an Ornish type diet or a Pritikin or a Neil Bernard Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine might be 10% fat or 15% fat. These are average people. They got maybe down to 25% fat, and the carb people didn't come near 5 or 10% carb. They did for a bit. They got there in the 8 weeks, and then they were back up at 25, 30% carb by the time the year was done. But they lost lots of weight and they had lots of metabolic improvement. Both groups were counseled to focus on avoiding added sugar and refined grain. And that cleared up a lot of issues. And actually, a fabulous postdoctoral research fellow who's now an assistant professor at Stanford, did a new paper that was just published where American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, where it was, we were looking at how low in carb or fat you got and how high you got in quality. So if you can imagine sort of a 2x2 table in each group, who got the highest and lowest in the fat or the carb, but who got the highest or lowest in quality in both groups. The winners got low in carb or fat and high in quality. And it made a difference that they were listening to the quality part of the diet when it came to weight loss. And then a lot of the cardiometabolic risk factors went along with that.
So what I'm hearing is that it's the healthy part that is the most important part. The low carb, low fat, high protein is less important if someone wants to lose weight and improve um, their numbers.
There's a 2019 or 2020 JAMA paper that looks at NHANES data. That's the National Health and Nutrition Examination data set, where there's been a van driving around the US for decades, and it just randomly picks up people and measures them and draws blood and stuff. And it's actually where we get great national trend data over time, because they've been doing this for so long. And this one paper that was published was looking at protein, carbs, and fats and the subtypes from, I think, 1999 to 2016. And they were quite stable. And if you just wanted to look at the three macronutrients, protein was almost always about 20, fat was almost always about 30, and carbs were almost always about 50. There are really slight differences, but the lines are quite stable. Then they went into the types. So I'm going to have fun explaining this. So of the 30% fat, about 10 was saturated, 10 was mono, and 10 was poly. For the 20% protein, I'm going to oversimplify here, but 10 was animal and 10 was plant. It was lower than that for plant, but just for simple math for listeners, let's just call it 10 and 10. So that left 60 for the carbs. About 10 was high quality carbs. Okay, now let's pause for a minute. 10, 10, 10 for fat, 30. 10, 10 for protein, 50. 10 for good quality carbs, 60. 40% was crappy carbs. It's like the elephant in the room. It's not like, yes, people eat some. It is overwhelming how much added sugar and refined carbs that we eat. So I'm going to give you 3 scenarios. And one is to go on the Ornish diet or Bernard or something like that and get rid of all the crappy carbs and replace them all with great carbs. So fill all those calories with legumes and fruits and intact whole grains. I don't know many people that can do that. Okay, now let's go keto. Let's take all of those 40% of calories from crappy carbs. Let's have fatty fish. Let's have olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, and let's replace, but not carbs. Let's have a really low carb but healthy, high fat diet. I don't know many people that can do that. I think the answer is wipe out those carbs and sort of personally see what distribution of healthy fats or healthy carbs work for you. If I got to do the next study, that's what I would do. I'd say wipe out 40% of your calories and let's play with this. Who does better on uber low fat, uber low carb? I found some. Let's say I had 100 people. I bet I find 5 that do great on each one, and I have 90 people left who can't go that low. So maybe a little more fat than carb, maybe a little more carb than fat, maybe half and half. I think there's a huge amount of wiggle room in there in a healthy diet to get rid of that huge chunk of not very beneficial calories and fill it in with all the unapologetically delicious other choices we have, both in the world of carb-rich foods and fat-rich foods.
Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle of stress and sleepless nights? I know I have. But since I've added Magnesium Breakthrough to my nightly routine, no joke, I've been able to quiet my mind, fall asleep fast, and stay asleep longer. And what sets this supplement apart is that while other magnesium supplements, and certainly all the other ones I've tried, and I've been taking magnesium for years, while all the other ones only give you 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms. So, I've never even heard of this. So it will not only help you fall asleep, but it will keep you regular and focus your mind, plus the many, many other things that magnesium does, which you've probably heard me talk about on this podcast, because as I said before, I've been taking magnesium for years and it's really, really helped me. But I love this magnesium because it contains all 7 forms of the supplement, and it's vegan, gluten-free, and soy-free. And also super important to me because, as we know, supplements aren't regulated. They don't contain always what they say they contain, but Magnesium Breakthrough has received a good manufacturing practice certification through third-party inspections, so you can trust by optimizers. So get this all-natural, full-spectrum magnesium supplement by going to buyoptimizers.com/switch4good and use promo code switch4good during checkout to save 10%.
I just wanted to stay on this a bit, but I have a couple questions as it relates to a couple of things I've learned as an athlete. Obviously, there's other opportunities for change than just weight loss, and I'm curious if you have delved into, a couple things that people are always looking for, it seems, on a daily basis in today's society is more energy and more happiness. And I have noticed that for me specifically, the higher whole food carbohydrate I eat, my happiness meter goes up, and I have more energy that lasts throughout the day. I'm curious about how our brains work, because some of that energy is, it's created by the fact that I am happy and excited and bouncing, and then I want to go out and energy and I want to run, and it's like all connected clearly. So for brain health, I know when I would bonk on the bicycle as I was training as a professional, which happened way more often in the early years because you learn what to take with you on the bike. That was just a massive drop in my blood sugar. And it would always take a carbohydrate to try to reverse the bonk. So what do our brains mostly run off of? I've always thought it was mostly carbohydrates. Like, do our brains run off of fat at all?
So they don't, this is a very interesting day to ask, because there's a media generated study about the keto diet and brain health right now, but it's not the day-to-day brain, it's mental health issues. So the brain and the central nervous system prioritize glucose. And take one step back from that. All your muscles, everything else burns a combination of glucose and fat. It's really good at that. So if you're going to be running a marathon, I'm sure if you're doing long bike rides, you're going to burn a lot of fat. If you're going to do continuous exercise over time, we have sort of unlimited storage of fat that kicks in when the glucose runs out. But when the motor's running best, it's usually glucose and fat that it's burning together. Yeah. But your brain and your central nervous system don't take up fatty acids. So those are long molecules. So those are carbon chains of 4 to, let's say, 26 carbons. They don't like that. When they're taking up glucose, that's 6 carbons, and they actually really would rather have 3 carbons. When the fatty acids do break down, they make 2 carbon units and can be put back together as ketones. And the brain can take up ketones, but its preference and the central nervous system is glucose. And that's from carbs. You can't, by the way, you can make fat out of carb, but you can't make carbs out of fat. There's like a cool little 3 carbon rule here. So if you had 3 carbons, you can put 2 3 carbon things together and make a 6 carbon glucose. But fats always break down into 2 units. They don't break down into 3 carbs. They break down into 2 carbs. So if you're starting to break down fats and your Krebs cycle, the one that burns the fat and glucose together, is being stopped by the shortage of glucose, that's how come they make ketones. So the brains will take up ketones because those are usually 4 carbons. And the brain will take up glucose, that's 6 carbons. But so much of our energy is stored as fatty acids, and it doesn't like those really long chain carbons and doesn't take them up.
When you talk about, just to stay on this one more question, when you talk about healthy foods, and that's the most important factor in terms of someone who wants to lose weight, for example, we already know that would be an important factor in terms of somebody's numbers and their blood markers. But
except for Slim Fast wouldn't know that. You can lose a lot of weight.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. Is if you isocalorically measure, meaning, I don't know if I use that term right, but if you use the same amount of calories and someone ate an unhealthy diet, and then you gave them the same amount of calories on a healthy diet, would they lose the same amount of weight, or does the high quality of the food make a difference? Or is it just that when you eat crap, it's so concentrated, you end up wanting to eat more and more, and you eat more calories in that day?
Yeah. So the isocaloric part of your question is important. So if you forced it to be isocaloric, I predict the weight change would be quite similar. So, but if you see how hungry that makes you during that meal and later in the day, that's where it starts to balance out. If you're not satiated, then maybe that meal you ate that much, but later you eat more, and it undermines the effort that you took. And so this is really, it's a fascinating point. Because scientifically, there's a whole group out there that wants you to be very isolationist and reductionist and do one variable at a time, and that's isocaloric. And in my world, I call that efficacy. It's like, if everything was controlled, it would work this way. And then if you take it out in the real world and people can't do it, that's called effectiveness. And it's like, oh, but they weren't eating what they were supposed to. Well, that's important. They didn't like it. It didn't taste good. It wasn't satiating. They couldn't find it to buy it. You can't make recommendations to the public that they can't follow. So those are very important criticism or issues to take up separately. And I wish it was less polarizing and it didn't create so much controversy, because really said, oh, cool, here's the isocaloric perspective. And here's the free living, not calorie matched perspective. How interesting that they both offer insight into the question, as opposed to one's right and one's wrong. No, they're both interesting ways to look at these questions.
It takes me back to the podcast with Barry and Nessel. Alexander, remember, you're like, oh, there's so many other things that we've learned all along than just calories in, calories out. Marion's like, that's all there is to it, period, end of story. And it's true. Like, it's the what is the same, right? Like what you're eating. If you're eating 1,200 calories, it's 1,200 calories no matter what it is. But the how can hurt your what. Because the how you do it can make you starving by 4 p.m. And then there you are, 2,500 calories in, because you just can't handle feeling that hungry anymore because of what you may have eaten.
Getting into the variability aspect, let me ask you two, do you eat breakfast or not? And do you have friends that skip breakfast? And I'm just going to preface this and say, I'm a wreck if I don't. I have very rational friends that are very healthy, that have no problem skipping breakfast. And I can't look them in the eye and say, you lie, you're a wreck, you're a mess, or you snuck something and you really had it. And to me, this is like, wow, there really is some interesting biological variability here. Some people are fine skipping breakfast and doing this in a narrower window. And I'm not sure that's a choice. I think they're like metabolically, biologically suited to do that. Are you breakfast eaters or skippers?
I'm an eater, and I just literally wait till I'm hungry. And sometimes that's 7:30 and sometimes it's 9:30. Like, it's just
okay. Not noon though.
Never. Okay. No, I'm always, I'm not ever not hungry. I mean, but by 10 I've eaten for sure. I'm hungry. Yeah.
But I bet you have friends who you respect and love that skip breakfast.
Yeah. They're just not into it. Yeah.
You don't hate them just because
they often drink a lot of coffee, and I don't drink coffee at all. And I think they do something else. Or I try and keep 12 hours from the last time I ate, which is usually right before bed at 9:00. So I eat at 9. Like today, I ate at 9. But if I go to the gym and I might not be home till 10:30 or 11, then I will eat at 11 sometimes. So it really depends on my life. But I wouldn't be able to go to noon if I was at home in front of my computer, because I don't.
But I mean, part of this is just the variability where we don't have one answer for everyone. There's some rules. We should get rid of the crappy carbs. We should try to eat healthy, low carb or low fat. Protein, interestingly, I don't know if you ever want to get into protein. I have some fun data on protein that as much as we obsess over it, it doesn't change much. Are you interested in that at all?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone asks vegans about their protein. So,
yeah. So oddly enough, so in our low fat, low carb diet, initially, the protein varied a little from baseline, and they really changed the carbs and fats. If you go out to 12 months, they maintain quite a bit of the fat and carb change, but their protein is both right at about 20%. In the keto med study, ketogenic versus Mediterranean diet, if you go out to the farthest time point, The protein is almost identical. There's a really famous weight loss study called Pounds Lost. It is the biggest, longest weight loss study ever done. It was a collaboration between Pennington in Louisiana, actually not in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, and Harvard School of Public Health. And they both recruited 400 people. And they had a very clever idea to answer all the questions at one time elegantly. There were 2 levels of protein, 15 and 25%. There were 2 levels of fat, 20 and 40%. And when you put those together, it meant carbs were either 65, 55, 50, 65, 55, 45, or 35. So in one study, they were going to answer low, high carb, low, high fat, low, high protein, all in one study. 2 years out, the differences in carb and fat were still there, but they were quite a bit more modest than they had hoped. They were about a third of the difference. The group assigned a 15% protein was eating 21, and the group assigned to 25 was eating 20 or something. I mean, they couldn't answer the question. The protein was identical at the end. I started putting this together for a conference talk that I had to get. I said, I'm not here to tell you what's going on. I'm here to ask you what's going on. Let me show you how many studies I have where people wildly change their carb and fat, and their protein is always 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. Where are these people who are saying, yeah, I'm at 30, I'm at 35% protein? Real people eating real food. I don't know if you've heard of this protein leverage hypothesis from a guy in Australia. You sort of eat till you get enough protein, and then you stop eating. So there's a very interesting hypothesis about choosing the foods that give you a reasonable amount of protein. And so, because we weren't talking about that, a lot of our talk today was about carbs and fats, healthy carbs and healthy fats. And that would be true with protein too, because if you get healthier proteins, that tends to be plants that have fiber in it, as opposed to meats that have the saturated fat in it. In fact, David Katz and I and some others wrote a recent paper about modernizing the definition of protein quality. And the traditional metric, either PDCAAs, that's the protein digestibility amino acid chemical score. There's 2 or 3 others with crazy acronyms. The basis of it is usually what's the chemical amino acid score, what's the proportion of amino acids, and how digestible is it? And we proposed, well, that's not quite enough because those sources of protein, meats versus plants, have an impact on the environment. And so the plant ones have less of an impact. And the meat sources come with saturated fat and no fiber, and the plant ones come with low saturated fat and high fiber. And so what if you made a 4-metric system for this protein quality? All of a sudden, some of the animal protein quality would go down and the legume and bean protein quality would go up, and it would be even or more even. And so this idea that, there's just not people out there that are protein deficient in the US. It's not an issue. So why are we leaving the environment and the other nutrients that come in protein-rich foods out of an equation of an overall quality diet that's good for humans and good for the planet? So very pleased of this rethinking or modernizing the definition of protein quality from what we published a couple of years ago.
Just one question on the protein. When you said that the study in Australia found that when people eat enough protein, then they stop eating protein, or they feel satiated and don't eat anything else, because a lot of people feel
so it could be a food issue. So that's the one. And it's actually not a study. It's more of an anthropological view of different animals and species. And they were sort of these investigators sort of looked anthropologically, how much protein do different species get and how much do humans get? And so if you look for this protein leverage hypothesis, it's pretty interesting. And it is tied, Alexander, to this idea that maybe part of the strategy would be choose your foods, and then when you get enough protein, you'll be satiated and you'll stop eating. I haven't found that exactly. So even though I just brought that up, let me bring up a very clever Barbara Ruhl's study from Penn State, where she made a casserole which always looked the same. So from the outside, you couldn't tell what was in the casserole. And she made a version that 6 versions. It had 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and 35% protein. She asked them to eat till they were full. They all ate the same number of calories. So that actually goes against what I said for satiety. So I got one perspective looking at species across centuries. And here's an idea. And I have another very clever nutrition scientist who's sort of masking the protein content of meals and asking people to eat until they're full. And it had no impact.
So it was calories. It was calories that the body was measuring instead of protein. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm having a hard time putting those two together, but I'm also fascinated with how constant protein is for most people. It's usually more like 18, but it varies. Maybe it's 16, 17, 18, 19. It's super. I have to do diet assessments in all my studies. And so I started looking across all of them. It's staggering how consistent it is around that range, despite asking them to eat widely varying amounts of fats and carbs. So I hope somebody's listening and says, I noticed the same thing. I'm going to write that guy an email because I think it's this, because I can't explain it.
We're gonna really enjoy those emails. I know. So sometimes I wonder if it's more simple than we make it. I remember when the high protein kind of craze came out, high protein, low carb, and it was like, I was studied and there was all this data and science. We were trying to figure it out. And it was like, to me, it was just like, it works for a while because no one was sitting on the couch binging on chicken wings or black beans. They're sitting on the couch binging on potato chips and ice cream. And so when you take that out and you put in like how much ever protein you want, or the intermittent fasting, like that, there's so many discussions and debates in science. It's like when you give yourself a 6-hour window to eat food, you're going to lose weight because it's a lot of work to try to eat 3,000 calories within 6 hours. And you're uncomfortable and you're stuffed and you can't work because you got to eat those. It's just like some of it isn't it some of it just a bit more simple than we make it?
Okay. So Dotsie, let me pick up on the intermittent fasting thing.
Okay. Please.
I'm not a fan.
You're not a fan because you like to eat breakfast or because you feel like it doesn't do what people say it does in terms of cleaning up your sides?
Alexandra, there's a big meta-analysis that says it has many benefits, but meta-analyses pool lots of studies together without necessarily taking account of the quality. And I know 3 high-quality studies that showed intermittent fasting did nothing. It really had the effect was negligible.
On anything or just
on weight? Mostly on weight.
What about health?
I think that's a focus.
Okay, yes, it is.
Well, okay, so my underlying problem with intermittent fasting is there's usually no attention to quality. It's just the window.
Right.
But herein lies the simple potential benefit. Again, if I had 100 people, I bet 5 of them would do better on intermittent fasting than some of the ideas that I have that are complicated. Please do Mediterranean. What's Mediterranean? It's just olive oil, right? Oh, no. It's olive oil and more legumes and more whole intact grains. Did I say intact? I want them to be whole intact grains, not ground grains. And I want you to have fruit and I want you to have above ground vegetables. And their eyes are glazing over and they say, can I have a simple rule? And I say, yeah, look at your watch. Is it time to eat or not? Oh, Doc, I love that rule. That is so awesome. That's all I have to do to decide. And so I think for some people, it's a really useful tool. I'm disappointed that it doesn't take quality into account. But how many senseless, unnecessary calories get consumed after dinner because you're watching TV and sitting on the couch and doing that thing? It's like, oh, I think I need some ice cream. I think I need a bag of potatoes. Oh, by looking at my watch. No, my window's over. You weren't actually hungry. So Dotsie, to get to your sort of, we're overthinking it, there's a simple rule. Yeah, I think part of the intermittent thing is how simple it is, the intermittent fasting, the time-restricted eating. And if we just didn't eat so many freaking calories after dinner when, what am I pumping up for here? Sleep. I'm getting ready to sleep. So let me make sure I got enough energy to pull those covers back and climb under I made it.
It's a tough time of day for people, for sure. Yeah, myself included sometimes.
Sometimes you give in and look, I just got to watch a little TV and eat something because I had a hard day today. And that's fair. But on a regular basis, that's a problem. It's a habit.
Tell us about the microbiome. That's a particular area of interest to you, specifically two studies, the RAMP study and the FIFO study. What did you get from that might help our audience change some of their own habits?
So the Sonnenbergs and I have now done multiple studies, and some of them have been with supplements. One was a fiber supplement and one was a fermented probiotic supplement. And they didn't have any strong main effects. In both of those, they have a fabulous lab team that's looking at all kinds of subcategories, and they always come up with something interesting, Alexandra, but hard to explain to an audience. Our best, most practical study was called FIFO, F for fermented, and Fi for fiber, and Fo for food. So that's FIFO. That was Justin's idea. I thought it was very clever. So we got one group to try to double their fiber intake. And we got another group to try to eat up to 6 servings a day of fermented food. And so I'm going to bet some of your viewers, listeners will roll their eyes and say, oh, great, eating fermented food all day. What a stupid study. So it turns out we wanted them to eat yogurt or kombucha or drink kombucha, eat sauerkraut, eat kimchi, or also kefir. Those are the 5 main ones that we had at the time. And if you realize that some of those servings are quite small, the kombucha that you buy in a store is 2 servings. Like 6 ounces of yogurt is a serving. Half a cup of kimchi, a half a cup of sauerkraut is a serving without many calories. We actually put together a whole bunch of different patterns of 6 servings, and the average caloric content of 6 servings is 300 calories. Mm-hmm. And so 6 servings a day sounds like a huge lift. And it turned out it wasn't. For somebody who's eating 2,000 or 3,000 calories a day, that's actually quite a small percentage. So those folks, there were 18 of them, diversified their microbiome, which is cool. We like diversity. Mm-hmm. We were curious. We assumed, we're giving them fermented food that has live microbes in it. So that's what they're getting. The Sonnenberg lab characterized all the microbes by buying all the things that the participants were buying. And they found that the majority of microbes that we're adding to the diversity were not from the probiotic foods. So this is a very illuminating, like, oh my God, what's happening here? Wow. Do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And their explanation for now is that there's a lot of microbes in our intestinal tract that need an opportunity to bloom and thrive. And so by changing up the environment of your gut, you may actually liberate something that was there in such a small quantity, you couldn't even see it before. And now that you've changed that community environment, it's thriving. So that group increased their microbial diversity. Quite a bit of it was not from the foods that they were eating, but just from the environment as a whole. And we measured 90 different inflammatory markers in their blood, and 20 of them went down. So if a couple of them went down, that would have been one thing, but 20 of the 90 went down. That was the strongest signal we got. And inflammation itself is very challenging because there's a lot of inflammatory markers out there. As I'm sure you and your listeners know, you can't go to your doc right now and say, hey, doc, I want to know what my immune function number is. Yeah. Give me my inflammatory number. Am I a 20 or am I a 50? So that hasn't yet moved into the clinical realm. So we all agree that inflammation underlies much of chronic degenerative disease, but that we don't know which inflammatory markers to measure or which subset. So we're stuck measuring something like 90 and seeing how many go down. So 90 went down. The group that doubled their fiber, we really had expected to see a lowering of inflammation in them, and there wasn't one. This is a relatively small study. There's 18 people doing fiber and 18 people doing fermented food, but the Sonnenbergs did a masterful job of interpreting this by sort of splitting up the 18 in groups of 6 that had the highest microbial diversity and the lowest and in the middle. And what they found was that people who had the lowest microbial diversity actually saw a negative increase in inflammation when we put all that fiber down their gullet. And their interpretation was, this has to be taken very loosely, is like a fire hose of fiber coming into the gut with not enough microbes to break it up. Because when they looked at the people with high microbial diversity, they did well. But the high and the low canceled one another. One inflammatory situation got worse and one got better. And it looked like nothing happened until they teased them apart. We have a current study going on with 130 pregnant women where we gave them high fiber, high fermented, or both. Because one of our hypotheses is, what if you gave them fermented food, increased their microbial diversity so that they could then handle the higher fiber that's coming down? So that's what we're looking at next. And we're tracking these women, the transfer of the maternal microbiome to the infant. We have 124 babies born already. And so we're going to see what happens in terms of the mom sort of optimizing their microbiome and transferring it to the kids. So that's some of the stuff we're doing with microbes.
And you're looking at the babies 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, up to 18 months after birth. Is that?
And the donor, this is actually a donor-funded study. She just asked us to follow the kids till they're 5. So yes, the original study is to follow them till they're 18 months old. And we won't know that for 18 more months because the last baby was just born a couple of weeks ago. We started with 135 women. Tell me if you think this sounds impressive. I thought we'd have miscarriages and nauseated women. And I thought, oh my God, I've never worked with pregnant women. How many will finish? 124 out of 135 finished the study. So we don't have the data yet, but we have this incredibly rich data set. And picture, some had C-sections and some had vaginal. Some are breastfeeding and some are not. Some got gestational diabetes and some didn't. So there are actually going to be a number of factors to pull into here. So it'll largely be an exploratory study, but the microbiome is fascinating. We do have some women getting C-sections that are, swabbing some cloth in vaginal juices, worried that the C-section prevented the transmission.
I was going to ask that. And they put it in the baby's mouth, right? Like from the vagina straight in their mouth so that they get, it's like they went through the canal.
I don't think we have enough, but we'll have some C-section women that did that and some C-section women that did not do that. So there's just a lot of really fun questions that remain to be answered there too.
And you haven't seen anything yet that you can share? Any tidbits?
So it's all the stuff has been sent out to the lab for the very first paper of the moms. This will be coming out for years to come. Oh, job security for me. Yay.
Yes. And then you'll come back because that's going to be mind blowing, I think.
Wait, didn't I answer all the questions?
No, I have another question for you. And so, just as an overview, with your years of working with people in nutrition studies and your own experience living a healthy lifestyle, what would you recommend to our audience overall that how they can live a healthy life at a healthy weight? Can you kind of put all the things you've learned into sort of a recommendation?
Yeah. So a quick way is a whole food plant-based diet, which means there's room to eliminate animal products, or there's room for some eggs or yogurt or fish, whatever. The diet that you can stay on is the healthiest diet. If you can't stay on it, it won't work. Another tip is, I think, Dotsie, to follow up on you, stop overthinking it. I mean, most of it's pretty obvious, and we sort of all know which choices are more likely to be healthier than others. My advice as a 65-year-old nutrition scientist is I keep changing my diet. I now have avocado toast with kimchi because of my microbiome work. And there's, little tweaks I keep trying with my diet as I find something else on the journey. And it is a journey. So let's say you don't like to cook that much and you're out cooking and you burn this thing. Well, it's all over. You'll never cook again for the rest of your life or until you have to eat again. Oh, tomorrow. I have to eat again tomorrow. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll try cooking tomorrow and I'll turn the heat down and I put in too little spice one day and too much spice the next day. And the third day, Goldilocks gave me the right amount of spices for my thing. And so if you give yourself some grace and patience and kindness, you don't have to figure it out all at once. I have some vendors at the farmer's market that I'm super comfortable buying from. And every once in a while I go to the damn farmer's market and they're gone. oh my God, my life's over. Like the one no, ask a couple other vendors, how they farm their stuff. Okay. And I feel like I get another answer and another answer. And then I'm in my comfort zone. It's easy to go find it. It's always there. And then it's not. Don't panic. Just do a little work, find another replacement for that thing, and back to my comfort zone. I'm okay. Just you have lots of kind of fun opportunity to go on this food journey and think, oh, wow, I read about that. Yeah, I don't quite believe that one yet, so I'm not going to do it yet. Oh, I read about that one. Oh, yeah, that one seems pretty powerful. I'm going to try that one. So it can be a fun journey. And it does have to bring you joy and pleasure. Like all this, if the nutrition stuff is like, oh, here's this cardboard that will really lower your cholesterol. Yeah, well, that's not going to work. I'm not going to eat cardboard. I want to love my food. Sorry, that might have been too many rules or tips, but.
No, it's great.
It's like trust yourself in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, anything that seems too easy to be true is. It's just food. Cook, shop, buy, love, eat with others. I should be out of a job. I do have job security, but if people would just friggin' eat food, I would be fine, but they aren't. And I have a job. And people ask me to be on podcasts to say, just eat food. Wow.
We're going to try and put you out of business here with this podcast so that people
Good. Please hurry.
Such a joy. Yeah.
Thanks.
Where can people find you if they need more Christopher Gardner in their life?
Well, I'm doing some Twitter at Gardner PhD, but I don't know, Twitter, I don't know how well that's doing. So I'm trying Instagram now, and it's C Gardner PhD. And then we have our nutrition group, which doesn't actually work this way. But if you type nutrition.stanford.edu, it will come up. It'll come up to our website for our nutrition research group. And I have a YouTube channel that's not very big, but it's starting to grow. I think it's actually, I'll have to find that one for you. It's like Stanford Nutrition. It's not Christopher. It's not Gardner. It's like Stanford Nutrition. Those are some of the ways to see what I'm doing.
And if we go to the nutrition.stanford.edu, we might find that plant powered that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think so. We just got funded to start something called the Plant-Based Diet Initiative, that's a mouthful. I usually have better acronyms: A to Z, Diet Fits, Keto Med, Swap Meat. Okay, but PBDI does just not roll off the tongue. But at the moment, it's the Plant-Based Diet Initiative. And it doesn't come up easily on Google yet. So we have a new communication director helping us figure out how to make that work better. But
if you want to send that to us, Christopher, off the record, send that to us. We'll put it in the show notes.
We will. Thanks. I'll have Meg send all those things.
I'm going to follow up with you anyway, and I will. I'll remind you to do that. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, was that enough fun for today?
Cool. That was enough fun. Bye, everyone.